We are looking at what I think is a familiar story. Luke 4, 1 through 13. Luke 4, 1 through 13. It'll be on the screen behind me. If you've got it with you, follow along that way. Before we read it, let's pray together. Oh God, we are grateful for these moments. In which you have prepared us to hear a word from you. And so we ask for that this morning with all humility. Surprise us, show us, teach us, move us, transform us in any way you see fit. We give ourselves to you. Amen. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them, he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, people shall not live on bread alone." The devil then led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And he said to him, "I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. If you worship me, it'll all be yours." Jesus answered, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." The devil then led him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you and guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." When the devil had finished all this tempting, he left him until an opportune time. We'll go that far. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So today, if you did not know, is the first Sunday in the season of Lent. How many of us knew that? Yes. So last Wednesday was Ash Wednesday, where we all contemplate the fact that we are all going to die. It's a fun day. And so it's always good around this time of year when Lent begins to think about, what is Lent all about? Why is this on the church calendar? What's going on here? And so Lent comes from an Old English word, Lenten, which means spring. And so it's celebrated. This season is in the springtime before Holy Week, which culminates in Easter, right? So Lent traditionally has been a time of self-examination, where we just take a look at our lives, a time to take a look at our lives and sort of gain some sort of self-awareness about where we are in life and where it is that we are headed. It's a time where we look at ourselves and we recognize that maybe we might not be living up to our best selves. And that's good, right? It's good for us to come to that conclusion, right? So we're part of the Reformed tradition. That might not mean anything to you, but one of the mantras we like to say is, we're reformed and always reforming. Now, a lot of times we get stuck on the reformed part, and we're like, we're the best because we reformed, but we made the changes. But then we forget this other part where we always have to constantly take a look at where we are, who we are, what we believe, the things that happen because of our beliefs, and we have to always be taking a look at ourselves and making the necessary changes. That's what Lent is about. Lent is a time for change. Lent is a time for transformation. It's a time for intentional renewal. It's a time to let the grace and the forgiveness and the love of the divine sort of flow in us and through us. It's a time for allowing the divine to recreate us. That's what this season is all about. And Lent always begins by looking at the same story. And I've done this story 8, 9, 10, I didn't count, like 11, 12 times maybe, both between this one from Luke and the one from Matthew's telling of the Jesus story. So sometimes it can be a challenge to do it again. But it's this weird little story where Jesus finds himself in the wilderness for 40 days being tempted by the devil. The devil has, he's fasting, he's hungry. He's got 3 temptations for Jesus to consider, right? So at this point in Jesus' life, he's 30 years old. He's at that point in life where many of us eventually get to around 30 years old, where we sort of take a look at our lives and we think to ourselves, is this really where we're headed? And we start asking questions about, oh my goodness, right? Is this really what life is all about? And then once you start asking that question, you never stop asking that question. It just sort of hangs with you for the rest of your life. So Jesus has just come from this incredible experience of self-awareness, right? After his cousin John baptizes him in the Jordan River, right? He comes out of this. He has this new awareness of who he is. After he sees this dove coming down and he hears the voice of the divine, this is my son whom I love, in whom I am well pleased. And he comes out of that experience with like this new trajectory in life. He's got a mission. He's got a purpose. And then the Spirit takes him, whisks him away into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. It's like, really? I just had this amazing experience. I know who I am. I know what I'm supposed to do. And the Spirit leads him into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, to be tested. What kind of a person are you going to be, Jesus? So, all sorts of different ways that we can look at this story. One of them is from sort of an individual side of things. We can put our individual lives in the place of Jesus. We can imagine ourselves experiencing the things that Jesus experienced. And then how does he handle the tests that he's given? And how might I handle the same sorts of tests in my own life? And that can really be helpful, right? Really. And it certainly fits with our individualistic society and our ways of thinking. It fits in with the customary ways in which we most of the time live into this whole season we call Lent. This is the season where we as individuals give up something for Lent, right? Things like coffee, sugar, alcohol, social media, and that list goes on and on and on. And that can be a good, healthy, beautiful experience, right? Sometimes during Lent, as individuals, we will grab what we think of as spiritual disciplines, and we'll try them on for a little bit, right? As individuals, we'll grab something like fixed hour prayer or study or fasting or any number of different spiritual disciplines. And these things are helpful. I think I encourage you to try it, explore, try one on, see if it fits. Maybe it'll last more than 40 days. Maybe it'll last more than the season of Lent. But that's sort of all the ways in which we individually live into the season of Lent and into this story. But there's another way to think about it. We can think about it as a group. We can think about it communally, as a community. Right? You see, as the story of Jesus sort of unfolds, there's a sense in which the story of Jesus is connected with the story of humanity as a whole and Israel in particular, right? And this is one of those places where, like, echoes of the Old Testament sort of flow through Jesus' story. And this is one of those places. So this is where it connects with humanity in general. Think of Adam and Eve. What happened to them? Right? So Adam and Eve, this is like this picture of early humanity, right? They are blessed and placed in the garden. And then what happens? The snake shows up and tempts them, tests them, right? So we've got that connection with humanity in general. And then you have Jesus, who's just baptized. He has he's blessed through baptism. And then what happens? He gets tempted by the devil. So it's connected with humanity. And then we have Israel in particular. They spend how many years wandering around in the wilderness? 40 years. Jesus spends 40 days wandering in the wilderness, being tempted by the devil. So the 40 days is symbolic of the 40 years of the community of Israel. So there's this sense in which Jesus is also a stand-in for entire communities. Are you tracking? Does that make sense? Okay, so this morning, depending on how much time we have, we're going to do a little bit of both. I'll start off, I'll talk a little bit about the ways in which this might connect to us individually, and then we'll sort of reflect together out loud how this might affect us as a community. Does that make sense? Does that sound like fun? Okay, let's go. It was the end of a 40-day fast. Jesus was starving. He was famished. I like that word better. So the devil approaches him and says, if you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread. He hits Jesus right where he's most vulnerable. He's like at the end of this 40-day fast, he's super duper hungry, hits him right in the stomach, but it's not yet time for him to eat. He's not out of the wilderness yet. And the devil, I just learned this past week, the devil uses this word stone, which would have conjured up in the imaginations of Luke's readers the image of a cornerstone, which is the first stone laid in the foundation of a building. After that stone is laid, there's the long, hard, arduous process, step by step, of building an entire building. It doesn't just magically happen, right? It takes a really long time, especially back then, to build a building like, say, the temple would have taken years and years and years. So it's the first step in a long process. And the devil comes to Jesus and says, you don't have to wait for all that. You can turn this thing into bread right now. You can have it now. You don't have to wait. You don't have to go through any sort of process of growth or maturation. You can have it now. So what we have here is the temptation to go after the quick fix, to sort of cheat the system, to have our desires met instantly. Instant gratification. And if that doesn't describe our world, I don't know what does. Instant gratification. Right? We all have pocket computers. We have access to all the information we could ever want at our fingertips, right? You can use your thumbs and type in whatever question you don't even have to type it. You don't have to thumb type. You can press a button and talk to AI and ask AI a question, and AI will talk to you, and you can have a whole conversation and have exactly what you need like that. You don't even have to waste the energy of your thumbs anymore. Like that takes too long. I'm just going to ask the question, right? It can get to you just like that. We live in a world where we don't want to go through a long, hard process to lose 5, 10, 15 pounds. We want to have it tomorrow. And we have people who will tell us we can give you that quicker than you ever imagined, because you don't have to go through all that hard work. You don't have to make any changes. You can have it now if you'd like to. If you want to, you can be sitting on the toilet. Have a brainstorm. Oh, there's that thing I wanted to get. And you can get on the website that rhymes with Spamazon, and you can take care of that business while you're taking care of business. Probably a little too far for a sermon, but here we are. Don't tell me you haven't done it. Don't tell me you haven't done it. The other day, I was not on the toilet, I was on the couch. And I've been wanting one of these cheese graters that you suction cup to your countertop, and you push the stuff down. It does cheese, it does vegetables, and you can turn the crank, and it spits it out really easily. I ordered it at 9 in the morning, and it came at 2:20 that afternoon. We can have it now. Instant gratification. It's the world in which we live, right? It encourages us to live into that sort of lifestyle instead of waiting, stopping, sitting in our hunger, just sitting with our desires, and then asking questions, interrogating them. What's behind this hunger? What's behind this desire? What is the need I'm really trying to satisfy here? Like, instead of instantly replying on social media, stopping, asking the question, what is the need, the desire behind wanting to do that immediately? See, when you stop, when you reflect, I don't know, maybe pray, or ask a community of people. Oh my goodness, then all of a sudden you get different perspectives, you start thinking about things differently, and maybe there are ways in which you can gain wisdom before just impulsively doing some of those things, right? So the temptation is a quick fix, to cheat the system, to get it now, to not go through the long, hard, arduous process of growth. Okay, what are some ways in which we're sort of tempted to do this as a community? Do you have any ideas about that? What are some ways, seriously, I'm asking, what are some ways that we're tempted to sort of cheat the system, to go after the quick fix as a community? Any ideas? It's okay. You lost an hour of sleep. I understand.
The idea that when we're troubled by, let's say, for example, housed people, that by just making that illegal or by telling them they can't camp there will solve the problem.
Yeah, so when we're troubled by unhoused people, just saying, you can't live there, that just solves the problem. Yeah, seems like let's make it a quick fix. Yeah, humanity in general loves quick fixes like that. I like it. What else? Peter.
That if I just have the right politics, that lets me off the hook for having to take care of the people.
If I just have the right politics, that allows me to not have to take care of the people around me. Seems easy. Okay, enough uncomfortableness. Can I talk? Early on when we were starting Renew, we were counseled to spend an inordinate amount of money on things like advertising and flyers and door hangers. And we were encouraged to think about our worship service and how we can sort of structure it and make it as entertaining as possible so that we would attract the greatest amount of people. And we tried it. We spent terrible amounts of money on advertising and flyers and door hangers, and we went out and we did that, and we canvassed neighborhoods and we put stuff on door knobs, and got in trouble one time because it said no soliciting, and it didn't work at all. We got maybe 1-2 people to come see who we are. This was back when we were in the middle school. cafeteria. And like there used to be a time where whole communities would be full of churches that played organ music and piano. And you could just pop up a church in a school, have a pastor in jeans and sandals, have guitars, an electric piano, drums, and a bass, and people would show up. We live in a different world. Like, it doesn't work that way, but we tried it. Instead of going through the long, hard, difficult, arduous task of relationship building and trust building, going through the hard, long process of personal invitation, giving ourselves away, serving in the community, all of that takes a really long time. That's like cornerstone material there. That's that foundational thing that you cannot turn into bread. It just doesn't work. Around here, we sort of try to stay away from what we might think of as a message of cheap grace, a message where if you just believe the right things about Jesus, then you will be saved, eventually go to heaven, and Jesus will take care of all your needs. Instead, we talk about things like following Jesus. We talk about things like personal growth. We talk about things like maturation, going through a process in which we actually live and love like Jesus, which is so hard. Like, we love the Bible, we love the scriptures, but we don't worship them as if they're God. We don't pretend that they're black and white and easy to follow. The scriptures are hard, difficult books, so we wrestle with them. We create spaces for questions. We interrogate what we believe, why we believe, what our beliefs, what kinds of effects do those beliefs have on other people, and we trust that the Spirit will be with us to lead us and guide us into the future. That is the long, hard, slow growth. But you know what? It mimics the growth that we see out in the rest of creation, right? You don't plant a seed and wake up and be like, tomorrow there's a tree. No, it takes a really long time. Okay, here's the second one. This one targets Jesus' ego, his desire for power. The devil shows him all the kingdoms of the world, says, hey, all of this and all of their authority has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. Now, at this point in the story, I'm like, really? Are you sure about that? Because I don't know about that. And Jesus says, no, I will not do that. He says, all you have to do is worship me. Right? So here we have the temptation to compromise ourselves in order to gain power, in order to grasp after power. And we know this one well as individuals. This happens all the time. We all have goals. We all have ambitions. We all have the things that we really desperately want, right? We all want to win in life. And it's tempting to compromise ourselves. It is so tempting to not be honest. It's tempting to spread false information in order to gain the power we think we need in order to get whatever it is that we want. That happens at home, that happens at work, that happens at school, that happens sometimes in church, if we're being completely honest about it. So I trust that you can figure out what that's like for you as an individual, so we're going to slide past this part. What about us as a community? Right? As a church, as a people, where are we tempted to compromise ourselves in order to gain or grasp after power? Any ideas? Kristen's laughing.
I answered the last question.
You did. You did answer the last one. Are there any ways in which we are tempted to compromise ourselves in order to gain, grasp after power? Sarah?
I think acknowledging or merely acknowledging something, if we equate that correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Through it, giving space to it, like having a conversation.
Yeah. So we think just naming something, admitting something, creating space to talk about it is the actual work of reconciliation, but we just sort of stop there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Rosalie. Oh.
I think just by nature of we as a Christian community are God-fearing and all whatever other words you want to, that we have the power to dictate anybody.
Yeah. Because we're God-fearing. We have the Bible. We are holy and righteous and just. We are a city on a hill. We are the chosen nation. We get to decide what everybody else has to do with their life. Yeah. Which sort of is like Christian nationalist. Like I get it. I get that impulse. The Christian nationalist movement. Are we familiar with that? Do we know what that is? Have we heard of this? I get it. It's appealing. I get it. It's alluring. Isn't it? When you think about that thought process, if we could just get control, if we could just grab the power, right, then we can remake the world the way we think it ought to be because we know what is best. We can legislate it. We can enforce those laws. And then we can enforce right behavior according to us. We can enforce correct morality. And so what does that cause us to do? It causes us to compromise. It doesn't matter the personal integrity of the person with power. It doesn't matter as long as we get what we want. Problem is, that's not the way that God works. Like, at all. Like, that's not what we find in the Bible. Like, at all. What does God do? God woos. God invites. God welcomes. God gives. God provides. God offers grace. God does not force. God does not coerce. And it's not the way of Jesus either. Jesus shows us what God is like. It's not the way of Jesus. Jesus doesn't tell people what they absolutely have to believe. You know what he does? He doesn't give people a list of things. You have to believe this, and then you'll go to heaven one day. What? He'd be like, what? No, Jesus tells stories. And when you tell a story, what are you doing? You're inviting people to enter into it. It's invitational. He's inviting people to sort of imagine a different world. And he trusts people in telling those stories. He trusts that the Spirit will work with those people in order to imagine a new, different world and make decisions for themselves on how they ought to move forward. He never forces things. In the Bible, anytime the people of God align themselves with power, with empire, guess what? It doesn't end well. Ever. It's a disaster. All throughout history, when the people of God, the church, aligns itself with power, with empire, it doesn't end well. Like, hello. Like, we've seen it over and over and over again. The people of God always end up sacrificing integrity and honesty and decency and most, if not all, the fruits of the Spirit. Jesus says, no, worship God. Serve God only. There's another side to this. we as a community hold a different understanding around things like social justice, human sexuality, gender. You know what's tempting? It's really tempting to be self-righteous about that. Oh my goodness, it's tempting to be militant about that. I feel it. It's tempting for us to make fun of people for being on the wrong side of history. It's tempting to try to force people to come to the same conclusions that we've come to. It's tempting to compromise. God woos. God invites. God welcomes. God offers grace. God in Jesus shows us what it looks like to be humble people. God provides. God doesn't force. God doesn't coerce. It would be good for us to remember that. Okay, one last one. This one sort of targets Jesus' vulnerability, brings him up to a high place, and says, hey, man, throw yourself off. God will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. Right? They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. I'm not going to ask you this time because we're out of time. This is the temptation, I think, and I'll be honest with you, I've struggled with how to say it, and I don't know if this is the best way to say it, so if this isn't helpful, just forget it. But this is sort of the temptation, the allure, or to sort of get caught up in fear-based faith, allowing our faith to be based in fear. Because this one's dangerous, I think, because it can be used to manipulate people, right? So this lie targets our deepest fears about what it means to be human. Right? We want to make God's love and presence into a sort of protective force field around us. There's this part of us that wants to believe that God will rescue us if we just believe the right things and if we just believe them hard enough. Right? And if we fall into this temptation, people with power can get us to do some pretty crazy things like, hey, jump off this roof. God will catch you. All right, we could probably talk a long time about this, but I'll end like this. If the cross teaches us anything, and I think it teaches us a lot, but if it teaches us anything, it teaches us that God's loved ones still get hurt. We ache, we bleed, and eventually we will die. We are loved in that vulnerability. We are not loved out of it, we are loved in it. We have a God who remains with us in our suffering. Right? We have a God who suffers beside us in our suffering. And this is good news, I think. It's good news because we also belong to a God who resurrects. So there's no struggle, no suffering we endure that God can't in some way eventually redeem. What that looks like, wish I had answers. Wish I could tell you exactly. But the story that Scripture tells us is that the story of humanity doesn't end in despair, doesn't end in fear. It culminates in an empty tomb, in a kingdom of hope and love, restoration, and new life. We may suffer today, but we do not suffer alone. And that suffering is never, ever the end. We have a God who suffers with us. And so as we move to the table,